The room was quieter than it had been all week. The courtroom, usually filled with murmurs, rustling papers, and the occasional shifting of chairs, had stilled completely. Every eye turned toward the side door as it creaked open slowly. What entered next was not what most had expected. Not an attorney, not a seasoned expert witness, not even another concerned parent. It was a toddler. 3-year-old Lily Monroe peeked cautiously around the doorframe, clutching tightly to a worn, stuffed dog in one hand and her mother's fingers in the other. She wore a pale pink dress, slightly wrinkled from sitting in the hallway for hours, and her hair was tied in loose pigtails that bobbed as she walked. Her tiny shoes squeaked against the polished courtroom floor, each step seeming louder than the last. This was the prosecution's final witness, their smallest, most vulnerable voice, and the entire case might rest on her. Lily didn't look at the man seated at the defendant's table. She didn't glance at the judge or the lawyers or the jury. Her eyes scanned the room nervously until they landed on a large golden retriever lying calmly by the witness stand. "Justice," she whispered under her breath. The dog's tail thumped once. The judge, an older woman named Honorable Denise Harper, had granted a rare exception that morning, allowing the trained police comfort dog to sit beside Lily while she testified. It was a controversial decision. Defense attorneys had argued it could unfairly bias the jury, suggesting Lily was a victim before she'd even spoken. But Judge Harper had seen the trauma reports. She'd read about Lily's mutism. And more. Importantly, she'd seen the videos. The ones from the therapy room where Lily only spoke when Justice was beside her. There was no hesitation in her ruling. If this child had any chance of communicating the truth, Justice had to be there. Now, the little girl let go of her mother's hand and toddled the rest of the way to the stand. A child advocate was already waiting to help her climb the small step stool built just for this moment. Lily sat down slowly, her legs dangling. She immediately placed her hand on Justice's back, her fingers curling gently into his soft fur. The dog leaned into her side without making a sound. The courtroom continued to hold its collective breath. Lily's mother, Emily, sat in the front row of the gallery, her face pale, her hands clenched together so tightly her knuckles had turned white. It had taken months of therapy, hours of home visits, and countless sleepless nights to reach this moment. There had been times Emily was convinced it would never happen, that Lily might never speak again. But then came the morning Lily whispered her first full sentence in weeks. Justice makes the bad dreams go away. The prosecutor, a kind-eyed man named Aaron Collins, took slow, cautious steps toward the witness stand. He knew he wasn't just talking to a child. He was speaking to a child who had been shattered, scared silent by something she couldn't even name. He knelt beside the stand. "Hi, Lily," he said gently, his voice calm and smooth, as if reading her a bedtime story. "Do you remember me?" Lily glanced at him and gave a slight nod. "I'm going to ask you just a few questions, okay? Nothing scary. If you don't want to answer, you don't have to. Is that all right?" She nodded again, a little more surely this time. Her fingers still held onto Justice. The judge leaned forward slightly in her chair. Everyone was watching. Not because they didn't believe Lily. They did. The behavioral changes, the medical reports, the nightmares, they all pointed to something terrible. But none of it would matter if Lily couldn't speak the truth. This was the moment that could either break the case open or end it in silence. Justice let out a slow, steady breath, and for the first time that week, hope entered the courtroom. The trial had already made headlines long before Lily stepped into the courtroom. Rainbow Steps Daycare was once considered a beacon of trust in the small, close-knit town of Everston. Parents dropped off their kids there with the same kind of casual ease that came with routine, waving goodbye from car windows, exchanging quick good morning nods with staff, then heading to work without a second thought. The man at the center of the daycare, Mr. Daniel Reynolds, had worked there for nearly 12 years. He was calm, patient, and knew the names of every child and their parents. No one suspected a thing until children started changing. One by one, the reports trickled in. A 5-year-old boy who suddenly refused to go near closets. A 4-year-old girl who began wetting the bed again and screamed when left alone. And then Lily, who at just 3 years old stopped talking altogether. Emily Monroe had noticed the change overnight. Lily, once bubbly and endlessly curious, became quiet and withdrawn. She would sit for hours holding her stuffed dog, staring out the window, refusing to play, speak, or eat more than a few bites at a time. When Emily tried to ask what was wrong, Lily would only shake her head and say, "Shh." At first, doctors said it might be a developmental delay or separation anxiety, but Emily knew her daughter. This wasn't a phase. Something had frightened her deeply. It was a quiet afternoon when Emily got the call from another parent, someone she barely knew. "Has Lily been acting different?" That mother's son had started drawing dark shapes and people with angry faces. He refused to say what they meant, but always called one of them Mr. Danny. The pieces clicked into place far too fast. Within 2 weeks, multiple families had filed complaints. The police were called. An investigation was launched. But like many abuse cases involving very young children, it was difficult to find hard evidence. There were no surveillance cameras inside the daycare rooms. Staff were hesitant to speak out. Mr. Reynolds denied everything and called the allegations heartbreaking and false. In public, he remained composed. In court, he wore a neat suit and tie and rarely spoke. His attorney insisted that the accusations were born from hysteria, that children's memories were unreliable, and that no one had actually seen him harm anyone. But what the jury didn't know yet was the story of a child who remembered more than she let on, one who couldn't tell her truth with words until a dog named Justice helped her find her. Voice prosecutor Aaron Collins had taken dozens of cases like this over the years, but Lily stood out, not just because of the suspect standing in the community, but because of how silent Lily had become. It was a silence that screamed. When the therapy team introduced Justice into Lily's life, everything changed. She would lie beside the dog in quiet therapy sessions, her tiny fingers wrapped in his fur, occasionally whispering things she wouldn't say to any adult. One day, after several weeks, she whispered, "He put Timmy in the closet." When the therapist asked who he was, Lily only said, "The man with the mean voice." It wasn't enough to charge Mr. Reynolds, but it was enough to keep digging. More children started to talk, some in therapy, some in sleep, some through drawings or tearful nighttime confessions. A chilling pattern emerged. Stories matched. Details overlapped. The case grew stronger. Still, the legal team knew, without a direct testimony in court, the case could still fall apart. That's why Lily's testimony mattered so much. She didn't just represent herself. She represented the children too scared to speak, the kids who had been dismissed or misunderstood. And now, with Justice at her side, she was finally ready to say what had haunted her for months. In a courtroom packed with strangers, facing the man who had stolen her innocence, Lily Monroe was the town's quiet hope. And everyone knew if she spoke, she might just bring the whole truth crashing down. No one had ever seen Lily talk to an adult the way she talked to Justice. In the therapy room at Everston Family Services, the golden retriever would lie beside her quietly, his head resting near her leg while she played with toys or sat in silence. When she felt overwhelmed, she would bury her face in his fur. When she felt safe, she would whisper, only to him. For the first 3 weeks, Lily spoke no more than 3 or 4 words during each session. Most of them were to Justice. Stay. Good boy. Don't go. Her therapist, Jenna West, a trauma specialist with a soft voice and years of experience working with abused children, had seen therapy animals make a difference before. But Lily was different. She hadn't just shut down. She'd retreated into a shell so tightly sealed that even her mother couldn't reach her. Jenna started keeping a notebook. Inside it were every phrase Lily had ever whispered near the one day, he yelled. Another, closet dark. And then one afternoon, while stroking Justice's ear, Lily murmured, he said I was bad. Jenna didn't push. She just listened. And over time, she and Justice built a bridge to Lily's world, a fragile, delicate space where fear still lingered, but courage began to grow. When the judge allowed Justice to accompany Lily into the courtroom, it raised more than a few eyebrows. Defense attorney Marshall Klein objected immediately. Your Honor, this will prejudice the jury. A golden retriever lying next to a tiny child while she testifies. That's an emotional stunt. It's manipulative. Judge Harper raised her eyes over her glasses. Mr. Klein, she said, do you understand what a comfort animal is? I do, Your Honor, but then you understand this isn't a stunt, it's trauma-informed practice. If you're worried about a dog's presence swaying the jury, I suggest you focus on your client's defense rather than the child's healing. Objection denied. The day before Lily was scheduled to testify, Jenna came to her house with Justice. Emily paced anxiously in the hallway while Jenna knelt beside the little girl in her room. Tomorrow, Lily, Jenna said gently. There will be lots of people watching, but you don't have to be scared. Lily didn't answer at first. Then, without looking up from her coloring book, she whispered, Will Justice be there? Yes, sweetheart, he'll be right next to you. Lily turned her head slightly and pressed her cheek against Justice's side, her small arms wrapped around his thick neck. Okay, she said. I'll go, Emily cried when she heard those words. She had worried, and every hour of every day, that her daughter might never come back from the place inside her where she'd gone to hide. But in that simple sentence, spoken so softly it could have been missed, was something she hadn't heard in nearly 6 months. Strength. Now, in the courtroom, Lily sat with Justice beside her as she faced a room full of adults, some in suits, some scribbling notes, others staring too hard, but all watching her. She didn't cry, she didn't cling. She just held Justice's ear between her fingers, gently twisting the fur the way she always did when she was nervous. He didn't move, except to nuzzle closer to her side. The bailiff handed the child advocate a box of tissues. No one used them yet. Lily, Prosecutor Collins began, his voice kind and steady. Do you remember when you used to go to Rainbow Steps? She nodded. Did you know a man named Mr. Reynolds? A longer pause this time. Then a quiet, yes. The room tensed. Justice didn't move. Can you tell us, did anything happen there that made you feel scared? Lily's fingers stilled. Her lips parted slightly. Everyone leaned in, but instead of answering directly, she turned her head toward the dog. Then she did something no one expected, not even her mother. She raised her hand and pointed at Justice. The entire courtroom froze. For a second, no one in the courtroom moved. All eyes followed the small hand of the 3-year-old girl as it pointed, not at the defendant, not at the jury, but directly at the golden retriever lying at her feet. Justice, a collective breath held. The prosecutor's lips parted, confused. Emily's heart stopped. Judge Harper leaned forward slightly in her chair. Was she accusing the dog? Lily stared at Justice with wide, soft eyes. He's the one, she said softly. Her voice trembled, but it was clear. He was with me when I was crying. A ripple of whispers surged through the courtroom. Some members of the jury exchanged puzzled glances. Mr. Reynolds's attorney looked up sharply, sensing a misinterpretation that could collapse into a mistrial. The prosecutor crouched slightly, careful not to alarm Lily. Lily, he said, gently, do you mean Justice, the dog was with you when you were crying? She nodded slowly, still not looking at Mr. Reynolds. Her eyes remained on the dog. He stayed, she whispered, in my room, when it was dark. Prosecutor Collins turned briefly toward the judge, his face tight with both relief and growing concern. He knew what Lily was trying to say, but the words were wrapped in the logic and emotion of a traumatized toddler. He had to make it clear, carefully. Lily, he said kindly, was there someone else in the room before Justice came? Someone who made you feel scared? Justice shifted slightly, sensing the change in Lily's breathing. Her hand trembled on his back. She didn't speak right away. Then she looked up, not at the prosecutor, but at the empty space in front of her, and quietly said, "The man with the mean eyes." Silence fell like a curtain. "Did this man hurt you?" Her lower lip quivered. She nodded. "How did he hurt you, Lily?" The child turned toward Justice again, as if drawing strength from his calm, steady warmth. He locked the door. He yelled. He told me I was a bad girl. A tear slid down her cheek. He said if I told us he'd take Bear away. A sob broke from the gallery. Emily, unable to hold it in. The judge didn't gavel it down. She didn't need to. The weight of Lily's words had already pinned everyone into reverent stillness. "Who is Bear?" the prosecutor asked gently. Lily clutched her worn stuffed dog in her other hand and raised it slightly as if showing him off. "This is Bear," she said. "He protects me too, like Justice." Collins smiled kindly. "And does Bear remind you of Justice?" She nodded again. A beat passed, and then, finally, he asked, "Lily, is the man who hurt you in this room?" Right now, her entire body tensed. Her hand on Justice's fur gripped tightly, and for the first time Lily turned her head to look at the defendant's table. Her eyes landed on Mr. Reynolds. She didn't point. She didn't scream. She just stared. Then, with a tiny voice, the kind you'd miss if you weren't listening closely, she said, "That's him. That's the man with the mean eyes." The gallery gasped. The jury didn't move. Mr. Reynolds didn't blink. Lily turned back to Justice and wrapped her arms around his neck again, hiding her face in his golden fur. The prosecutor didn't ask. Another question. He didn't need to. Judge Harper recessed court early that day. The courtroom emptied in silence. The jurors left with red-rimmed eyes. The defense looked shaken. And in the corner of the witness stand, Lily sat quietly beside her dog, holding on to the only one who had never once asked her to speak, only to feel safe. In that courtroom, for the first time in months, Lily Monroe had found her voice, and the dog beside her whose badge said Justice had helped her do it, in every sense of the word. The courtroom was quieter the next day, not because people weren't present, but because something sacred had settled over the space. Lily's quiet testimony had stunned everyone, not because it was loud or graphic, but because it was honest, raw, delivered through the fractured voice of a child who had no reason to lie and every reason to forget. Word had spread fast. Reporters clustered outside the courthouse steps. The front page of the Evanston Tribune read, "Child witness names suspect in court," and beneath it, a photo of Lily gripping her stuffed dog with Justice curled at her feet. But the attention didn't bring comfort. It brought pressure. Inside the defense room, Daniel Reynolds sat stiffly at the end of a narrow table, jaw clenched, eyes unreadable. His attorney, Marshall Klein, paced with frustration. The weight of the case had shifted. Before Lily's testimony, the defense had been confident. No physical evidence, no clear eyewitness, nothing directly linking Reynolds to abuse. Now, they had a name, a face, and a room full of jurors who had watched a child say, with heartbreaking clarity, "That's him." Klein rubbed his temples. "She's 3. Her memory could be wrong. And the damn dog, it's emotional theater. The jury's not thinking logically. They're thinking like parents." Reynolds finally spoke. "Then make them think differently." Next day, the defense brought in their own expert, a child psychologist who specialized in memory recall and suggestibility in young children. She was poised, intelligent and persuasive. Using a series of slides and case studies, she explained how children, especially those exposed to repeated questioning or therapy, could be unintentionally coached into believing things that never happened. Children that young, she said, are vulnerable to outside influence. Dogs, therapists, even parents. They don't need to plant false memories deliberately. The child may simply want to please the adults around her. Marshall. Klein rose after her testimony, standing before the jury with both hands open like a man offering truth. "We all care about Lily Monroe. We want to believe her, but good intentions don't equal facts. There are no videos, no medical reports of injury, no staff witnesses, just a frightened child, a comfort dog, and a courtroom full of emotion." He turned toward the jurors, his voice low, steady. "You must base your verdict on evidence, not empathy." It was a strong closing argument, but in the hallway outside, something happened that didn't make it into any official record. Lily was sitting on a bench near the vending, machines coloring in a small notebook, while Justice lay at her feet. Emily sat beside her, speaking quietly with Jenna, the therapist, when a woman approached. She was in her 50s, dressed in a nurse's uniform, holding her phone like she wasn't sure what to do with it. "Excuse me," she said gently, glancing toward Emily. I saw the news, that little girl, she pointed at Reynolds yesterday. Emily stood protectively, placing a hand in front of Lily. Yes, why? The woman hesitated. Then she knelt slightly, keeping her voice soft. I used to work at Rainbow Steps. Only for 6 months. Part-time. I never saw anything. But there were things that bothered me. A child once told me Mr. Reynolds locked him in a closet. When I reported it to the director, they brushed it off. Emily's eyes widened. You told someone. They said the boy was imaginative. I didn't press it. I regret that now. She looked down at Lily, who had paused her colouring to listen. Then the nurse said something she hadn't planned to say. She's not wrong. I believe her. That evening, Prosecutor Collins received a phone call from his assistant. You're not going to believe this, she said, almost breathless. We've got a new witness. Collins leaned back in his chair, eyes narrowing. Who? Former employee, willing to testify, and she's got a signed internal report from 3 years ago. He didn't answer right away. He was staring at the printout of Lily's testimony, taped above his desk. The tide had turned, and Lily Monroe's small voice had started a wave. When Nurse Angela Herrera took the witness stand, there was a new kind of hush in the courtroom, not of curiosity this time, but of rising tension. Prosecutor Collins straightened his notes, but didn't need them. This wasn't part of the original witness list. Angela had stepped forward only days earlier, spurred by Lily's testimony and her own long-buried guilt. It was a risk, one that could blow a hole in the defense's timeline. She took a breath and began. I worked part-time at Rainbow Steps in 2022, she said. Mostly late mornings to early afternoons. I helped supervise the nap room and sometimes assisted with snacks or playground shifts. Collins stepped forward, voice calm. Did anything unusual happen during your time there? Angela nodded, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. Yes, one day I found a little boy crying in the storage closet next to the playroom. The door wasn't locked, but it was shut. The light was off. When I opened it, he flinched. A murmur stirred in the gallery. The judge raised a hand and silence fell again. What did the child say? He said, Mr. Danny put me in there because I touched the blocks too fast. I remember the exact words. He was maybe 4. His name was Caleb, I think. And did you report it? Angela hesitated, eyes darting to her lap. Yes, I told the daycare director, Mrs. Flint. She dismissed it, said it was part of a time-out method that Daniel was using, creative discipline. She told me not to mention it again. Did you? No, but I filed a private note for myself, and I kept a scanned copy of my concern report on my phone, just in case. She pulled a printout from her bag, already submitted to the court. Dated, signed, initialed by her. Collins let the moment breathe. And why are you here today? Angela's eyes shifted to Lily, sitting quietly in the front row beside Emily and Justice, because she said what I was too afraid to say, and I won't stay silent again. The defense tried to rattle her, suggesting she was motivated by fame, guilt, even money. But Angela stood firm. When asked why she didn't bring it up earlier, her answer was simple. I didn't think anyone would believe me, but they should have believed the kids, and now I do. Her testimony hit like a wrecking ball. For the first time, there was corroboration, a history, a pattern, and a cover-up. That afternoon, Mr. Reynolds was no longer the calm, silent figure he had been. He shifted in his seat. His hands fidgeted, and for the first time, his eyes darted nervously across the room, especially when Lily turned her face just slightly in his direction. He wasn't invisible anymore. He was seen by a child who'd been through darkness, by a nurse who regretted her silence, by a jury that was watching everything. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. The case had grown beyond local news, now picked up by regional outlets, podcasts, and parenting groups nationwide. Emily was overwhelmed. At night, she lay awake replaying Lily's voice in court. The strength it took for her daughter to sit in front of strangers, the man who hurt her, and still find words. It amazed her. It broke her. But something was changing. Lily was beginning to smile again. Not always, not every day, but sometimes, when brushing Justice's fur, or building towers with her blocks, or watching her favorite cartoon, giggling softly without fear. Healing was slow, but it was real. Later that week, as the trial neared its end, Jenna sat with Emily in the courthouse lobby. "She's braver than most adults I know," Jenna said, looking through the glass at Lily and Justice playing quietly in the courtyard. "You do know what she did, right?" Emily smiled faintly, her eyes wet. "What's that?" She cracked the silence. That little girl's voice. It made people speak up. Emily looked out at her daughter, sunshine warming her curls, hand resting on the back of the dog who never left her side. "She didn't just speak," she whispered. "She changed everything." The final week of the trial hung over Everston like a heavy sky before a storm. Outside the courthouse, journalists waited with live feeds and broadcast vans. Parents from around the city whispered outside playground gates and school entrances, trading updates about the case like urgent secrets. The name Daniel Reynolds was no longer just a defendant's name. It was a symbol, for some, of danger, for others, of a broken system that had allowed him to stay hidden in plain sight. Inside the courtroom, the mood was electric. Everyone sensed it. The end was coming. The defense gave their closing arguments with the calm desperation of men who knew they were losing ground. Marshal Klein paced in front of the jury with slow, deliberate steps. "Yes, it's a heartbreaking story," he said, gesturing toward Lily, who sat quietly at the front of the gallery, justice curled around her feet. "But our justice system isn't built on feelings. It's built on facts." He pointed to the therapy records, photographs of smiling children at rainbow steps, a carefully framed image of Mr. Reynolds with a child on his knee from 2 years ago. "This man dedicated years of his life to early childhood development," Klein continued. "Do we throw that away based on the memory of a 3-year-old? But his voice lacked its earlier confidence, because even the jury could feel it, the weight of Lily's words, the courage of Angela's testimony, the undeniable truth lingering. In every quiet moment that followed, when Prosecutor Collins rose for his closing, he didn't use a slideshow. He didn't pace. He stood still, hands gently folded. "I could tell you about timelines, or trauma, or how many children never speak. But instead," he said, his voice calm but steely, "I'll tell you what happened." He looked straight at the jury. A little girl was hurt by someone she trusted. She was too young to explain it, too scared to name it, but she remembered, and when she felt safe enough, with a therapy dog by her side, in a room full of strangers, she found the strength to speak. He turned toward Lily and paused, letting the moment settle like a held breath. "She told us who did it. And more importantly, she told us the truth. There was no dramatic finish. No pounding of fists or raised voices, just a quiet final line. You get to decide if her truth matters." The jury deliberated for 5 hours. Emily couldn't sit still during that time. She walked the length of the courthouse hallway again and again, her eyes flicking between the courtroom door and the small clock on the wall. Jenna stayed beside her. So did Justice, resting calmly while Lily played with her toy figurines in the waiting area, unaware of how much was at stake. When the buzzer sounded and the words, "Jury has reached a verdict," came through the PA system, the air in the courthouse changed completely. Everyone stood. Everyone held their breath. The judge entered. The jury filed in. Mr. Reynolds sat rigid in his seat, his lawyer a stone beside him. The forewoman rose, paper in hand. "In the case of the People versus Daniel Reynolds," she read, "on the charge of aggravated child endangerment and criminal abuse." Emily clutched the arms of her chair. "We find the defendant." A pause. "Guilty." The words echoed in Emily's chest. Lily looked up from her toy and turned toward her mother, sensing the shift. Justice, as if on cue, placed his head gently in Lily's lap. Emily didn't cry. Not right away. She simply exhaled, like she'd been holding her breath for months. As the judge addressed sentencing details, people slowly began to rise and leave. But in the front row, Emily stayed seated, her hand on Lily's shoulder, her eyes still locked on her daughter's face. Lily leaned down and hugged Justice tight. "I told you," she whispered in his ear, barely audible. "I told the truth. And the golden retriever, her quiet protector, her steady strength, lifted his head and gently licked her cheek. It was over. But what Lily had done would echo long after the gavel fell. 3 weeks after the verdict, the courthouse was quiet. The crowds were gone. The reporters had packed up. The tension that once electrified the air had melted away, leaving behind silence. And something else. Stillness. Not the kind that signals emptiness, but the kind that follows resolution. The kind that lets healing begin. Emily Munro stood at the edge of Lily's bedroom doorway, watching her daughter from a distance. Sunlight streamed through the window, painting golden stripes across the hardwood floor. Lily sat cross-legged with Justice curled beside her, gently brushing his fur with a soft pink brush. She talked to him in a quiet, content rhythm, a pretend story about a princess and a dragon, full of joy and make-believe. For the first time, in nearly a year, she sounded like a child again. Emily's chest tightened, not from fear, but from something deeper. Gratitude, relief, awe. She stepped in slowly. "Hey, sweetheart," she said. "Want to take Justice outside before lunch?" Lily looked up and nodded eagerly. "Can we go to the garden? The flowers are open now." "They are," Emily smiled. "Let's go see them." They walked slowly down the sidewalk toward the small community garden 2 blocks from their home. It had become a quiet retreat for the two of them, and Justice, since the trial ended. Lily skipped ahead slightly, Bear tucked under one arm, Justice on his leash walking patiently beside her. Emily caught up, watching as Lily knelt beside the marigolds and leaned in to smell them. "She told the truth, Mommy," Lily said suddenly, without looking up. Emily paused. "Who did?" "The flower," Lily answered, smiling. "It bloomed just like it said it would." Emily knelt beside her, brushing Lily's hair back from her face. "So did you," she whispered. Lily blinked up at her. "I did? Yes, baby, you were so brave." Lily reached down and patted Justice's head. "He helped me. He didn't talk, but he stayed. That's how you know someone's good." Emily nodded, swallowing the lump in her throat. "That's right." Elsewhere in town, changes were already underway. Rainbow Steps was under new management. The previous director had resigned quietly, and a state investigation had uncovered several other questionable practices. More former employees had come forward, emboldened by the trial. The state passed a new policy mandating surprise inspections of childcare centers and adding legal protection for whistleblowers like Angela. But perhaps the biggest change came from within the community itself. Parents had started talking to their kids differently, listening more, watching more closely, believing sooner. Lily had started something, and people were beginning to understand just how powerful a small voice could be. 1 month later, Lily was invited, along with Emily and Justice, to a ceremony at the town hall. It wasn't publicized, no cameras, no press, just a small group of people who had watched a little girl turn fear into courage. The mayor knelt to Lily's level, smiling warmly. "Lily," he said, "sometimes people think heroes have to be big, but you showed us that heroes can be small and soft-spoken and still incredibly strong." He handed her a tiny medal on a blue ribbon, her name engraved along the edge. "And for being so brave, we want to honor you." Lily looked at the medal, eyes wide. Then she looked up at Justice. "Can I share it with him?" The mayor chuckled. "I think he'd like that." Lily slipped the ribbon gently around Justice's neck. He wagged his tail once, then leaned against her. Emily watched from behind, tears in her eyes. Not because Lily was being recognized, but because she was free. Free from silence, from fear, from the shadow of a man who no longer had power over her. Justice had stayed by her side, and now Lily was leading the way forward. One small step, one blooming flower, one brave word at a time. Because truth, once spoken, doesn't disappear. It grows.